want to welcome and introduce our featured guest for today's call, Patricia Wilson. Patricia is Professor Emerita in the Community and Regional Planning Program at the University of Texas at Austin School of Architecture. Patricia teaches international development, public participation, and conflict resolution skills. Her research focuses on individual and social transformation, strengthening civil society, and community building. She's authored several books and articles, including her latest work in 2019, The Heart of Community Engagement, Practitioner Stories from Across the Globe. We're really delighted to have Patricia with us today to share stories of wisdom and heart in community engagement. And her holistic approach to working with communities really resonates with ours. And yes, the fact that you also love to identify patterns and principles of doing good community engagement. So today, Patricia is going to share insights from both her learning journey and some case studies that highlight co-intelligent ways of affecting change. And as we have, Tom is very familiar with Patricia's work, so we're going to sometimes on these calls, we have presenters presenting our slides, but this call, we're going to start off with an interview, kind of questions from both Tom and myself. So yeah, we're going to kick off, Patricia, by, thank you for coming along and being with us today. And yeah, it would be great if, first of all, maybe you could just give us an overview, a brief introduction to what your work is, and then maybe go deeper into your learning.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. I was just thinking, as you described what the Co-Intelligence Institute is doing, how a few decades ago I would have said, oh, that is woo-woo stuff. And because I was more on the radical political side of the spectrum. And when I went to Latin America to do my dissertation research, the social science institute that sponsored my work didn't know that they were, that's when I got radicalized, meeting the left-wing thinkers from Latin America. And that was what motivated my field research on regional development in Peru, and motivated my teaching in Texas. Now, when you teach in Texas, especially in the late 70s, early 80s, you had to walk a fine line politically. And so I got into doing paradigms, radical paradigm, liberal, conservative, and that's how I could get it all out. And I was doing consulting on the side too, mostly in Latin America for international agencies. One of my transformative moments was on one of these consulting jobs in Central America. I was asked, and not just to do an academic analysis, but to bring together stakeholders in a process to talk about the development issues that the country was facing. And I said, sure, yeah, I'll be happy to do that. I had never led a group process other than a classroom before. And I asked one of the consultants there who introduced me to the whole topic of group process and facilitation. And I was scared to death, but it was magical. And I went further and further into that. And some of my students, I just retired from the University of Texas last year. And some of my students did a recording of their memories, my old students going back to like 1980. And one of them remembered when I introduced Peter Sengi's book and the particular chapter called Personal Mastery. And that he cited the exercises that are in that book, you know, of how to reflect on yourself in the process of leading change. And so I realized it was about in the late 80s, around 90, I guess, when my paradigm shifted. And I got really into change processes. And it was students responded to it well. And it was certainly reflecting my own individual development, because that is when I began to discover my own spiritual core. And it related so closely to group process and one's presence in group process, and feeling a sense of the whole, feeling the group as a living entity, and fostering the life of that living entity. And it was a dramatic change for me and my approach to teaching, my approach to consulting, my approach to life. There was also one of my graduate students, introduced me to a brand new evolving spiritual group in Austin that has since become a well-established church, but it was a contemplative Christian church in the making. And so I was in the ground level of that experiment, which blossomed over the next couple of decades and really affected me and made me more sensitive to my own ability to be present in the moment, in my engagement with others, and in my facilitation. This is a lifelong task, learning to be present in a group process. And but when you're open to it, what you need comes. And so there was another turning point. How can I phrase this? It was, I was in the office of a colleague of mine, Betty Sue Flowers. And she said, "Hey, Patricia, I've got this book manuscript that I'm working on with Peter Senge and a guy named Otto Scharmer. And I just need, I know you would be able to read through this and catch any errors or confusions. Would you mind looking at it?" And I read through it and I riveted on Otto Scharmer and his stories of transformation. Betty Sue said, "Oh, well, why don't you come with me to meet him in Nova Scotia at a conference this coming summer?" Great. And so that was about 2003. And so I was meeting kindred spirits at that point who were into group process with a with a spiritual dimension to it. And by spiritual, I mean the inner awareness of oneself and the collective process. And so that was deepening my practice, and of course showing up in my teaching as well. So when I did the book that Andy referred to, The Heart of Community Engagement, Practitioner Stories from Across the Globe, I basically compiled a series of stories that showed my change with each successive encounter in various countries in the world and in the US and then along the Mexican border. And I added these reflective questions at the end so that the reader could interiorize or contemplate, reflect on, and interiorize the messages of each chapter. And interestingly enough, when I listened to the recordings that the students had done for me as a retirement gift, I got to see how important a lot of those moments were in their lives. That, as you know, that kind of attention to self and group is a deep personal process, and it had been impactful in a deeply meaningful way for many students throughout the years, and so that gave rise to this book, and what's so interesting is along the way I realized there's a huge movement in this direction, and I was definitely influenced by NCDD, and Tom was one of the first people I really got to know in that. That was a nationwide gathering of people involved in process. And I feel it instigated a very cross-disciplinary movement that is just taking off, developing by leaps and bounds. And in spite of the world conditions that we see and the pessimism it can create, we have a sense, we have something to hold on to that leads us forward. And I can sense that much larger movement that transcends anything that I was part of. It's a big movement. I was very pleased to see this movement captured in some way in a very new book of Routledge called The Routledge Handbook for Creative Futures. Let's see, when did it actually come out? It was 2023. And a lot of academics from different disciplines are in there talking about this kind of depth of engaging with the field and having a field awareness. That in a nutshell is kind of my trajectory over the last couple of decades. And
if I could pause you there a second, Patricia,
yeah.
I would love to just reflect a little bit there. So yes, you were on a particular trajectory up until the 1980s around, sort of radical left-wing work with and presenting what was going on in South America. And then there was a shift that you experienced around process and group work and meeting Peter Senge and Otto Sharma. One thing that I'm really curious is how you yeah, the some of the cases, some of the actual example, the real world examples that you brought this new understanding to, and how that unfolded, and some of the principles you saw at work with those communities, and how it impacted them when you work with them using those principles. So yeah.
Yeah, let me give a couple of examples. Well, I remember doing a consulting job for USAID in El Salvador after the Civil War. And given my background, I had a positive inclination towards the FMLN, the one of the left-wing protagonists in that issue. And I remember the USAID driver taking me to an interview with the FMLN. And a couple of blocks away, he said, I cannot take you up the last 2 blocks. I simply can't. Would you mind walking? And I said, oh, well, what's the problem? He said, it's what the FMLN did to my family. And that somehow opened my heart in such a way. I could still connect with the person I talked to, the FMLN, but somehow my heart was wider, was more widely open than I would have imagined. And another example is where I must say I learned from one of my students. We were on a project in Mexico, and I had some wonderful relationships built up there with the local communities that we were working with. But one of them was a new project and a new community. And we had been assured that we would be able to work with them on the days that we were there. So we show up bright and early at the designated time in this informal community on the far outskirts of Mexico City. We're sitting there next to this kind of crumbling old but still attractive church in the middle of their community, surrounded by tumbleweeds, and nobody's there to meet us. And I'm starting to, my students are wondering what's happening. I'm starting to do the kind of automatic thinking, oh, this is awful, this is, blah, blah, blah. And one of my students, who is happened to be a choral singer as well as a doctoral student, went inside this crumbling church. And I heard him singing some notes as though he was searching for something. And then he found it. He found what he was searching for and began to sing with the church. He found that resonance point with that church that turned that church into a living cathedral of beauty. And that student exemplified so much what I was trying to get across and was having difficulty practicing myself, of being fully present to the field around you and to what the field is needing. So when I could let go and take that in, that became the beginning of our encounter with the community, and it all turned out great. But that is a learning process. And there is one other example I would like to share with you. And let me see, it's not in the book because it happened after the book. And it happened after the students had studied from that book and done their journals with the reflective questions at the end of each chapter. So we really were in sync with each other. We knew the ideas of not coming in to tell the community, the low-income community outside of Monterrey, Mexico, what to do or to bring our expertise, but to go to listen and be with and see what would emerge, what was emergent. And so each night we got together to share the experience of the day with each other. And that was the inner experience as well as the outer experience. We were in sync. We had created a trusting field, and we had let go of the idea of, oh, what great change are we going to create here that we can go back and tell our colleagues about. No, we were there to attune to and attune with the local community and work with them in what they saw as important and emergent. So I will say the result was not only very close connection among all of us from the university who were there, but a very close connection with the community members that we were working with. And they were so surprised and delighted at our presence with them that they continued. And it was catching. So the project that got identified was identified by first by the children. We had engaged the children in this process, and they wanted to turn that dump site into a park. And so they presented, we asked them to present their proposal to the adults. And the adults said, well, what are they going to say? They said, yes. And then came the naming of the park. And they let the children name the park. And they voted on it. And it was El Parque de los Niños, the children's park was the name. And when we left from there, there was just such a close relationship. They kept showing us exactly what was happening with the park. You know, we had started out the building of the park, and the cleaning of the dump, the building of the park, and they kept informing us on the progress. And that was, let me see, that would have been 2019, I think. And they are still in touch with us, and their progress and their care and their love. So so I was thrilled with that kind of awareness, that kind of heartfelt ability to sense the larger field, to let go of one's own egotistical needs to prove their competence, and to foster a process that would carry on its own by the community. So that to me is a beautiful project that I was so happy I had the chance to be a part of, and with my students to experience that.
That's a beautiful example, Patricia. Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to hand over to Tom in a sec to ask a question, but just before that, as a person who works in sort of field of public engagement and working with communities myself, I'm really curious about some of the sort of some of the I suppose maybe even more logistical aspects of, like, when you went out to Mexico, how long did you engage with these communities, and was it like a continual process of going out and listening and getting immersed in the community and finding out what it needs? I'm kind of curious about how it all took place.
Yeah. Well, two of my student assistants, one of whom was from Monterey, started cultivating the relationship with the nonprofit that was working in that low-income community. And that happened, that began in depth about 6 months before we went down there. And since one of the students is from there, finished his doctorate and went back to Monterey, he has been continuing that engagement with that community. The other example from Mexico that's in the Heart of Community Engagement book is that was a 5-year engagement, working with a local university as our go-between with the community. So the length of engagement is very important, and it's not a parachuting kind of a thing where you come in and then have a great time and leave. It's really, that is the visible kind of part of it, but the less visible is the preparation. We had Zoom calls with the director of the local nonprofit that was working with the community for months leading up to the site visit, in that last case that I told you about. So, and then the follow-up. So that's important. It's relationship building. It's not student tourism. Yeah.
Thank you, Patricia. I can see, Rosa, you have your hand up. I just want to give Tom an opportunity to answer a question, and then we can move in. And
I want to hear.
Yeah.
I want to hear from Rosa. I'm not in a question and answer mode right now, and I'd love to say a bit, but I want to get whatever Rosa has on her top right at the moment.
Go for it, Rosa.
Oh, I was just going to say thank you, Andy. I thought that was an excellent question. And basically just wanted to underline what Patricia said about the importance of the behind the scenes work and the context, the relational context that's created before the project in a more bounded way happens. And I just wanted to say that it reminds me so much about what we learned about the Malawi Citizens Assembly, how the gentleman who had organized it had done a lot of outreach and relationship building to the politicians in the area so that they would not feel that this was something that they needed to be threatened by. But if you just were to look at the film, and if we hadn't asked him that question about what the preparation had been, like, that part wasn't in the film, and the film is beautiful. This is not a criticism. It's just how easily those preparatory pieces get left out. So I was just really happy that you asked that question and that Patricia responded how she did.
Fantastic. So if, Tom, you don't have another question, I do have a question here, which is related to some of the principles that you have observed as being part of this awareness-based action research. And I came across in researching for this call a few of the principles that you've spoken about, which are, the triple loop learning, some Taoistic principles as well, and also importantly the ensemble awareness. I just wondered if you'd be willing to share with us what they are and how you feel they're important.
Yeah. So so you know that the quantum theory was coming in and going beyond the scientific community to the social science community, and so this was the beginning of seeing systems and holistic systems, and it was gradually it was entering a depth dimension too. So that meant the presence, your own presence in a larger group. So this was happening, and so it's not like unique to this, but I called it ensemble awareness. I think motivated by my students singing in that dilapidated church. He had created an ensemble. He was an ensemble singer. And he had created an ensemble with that church. And so ensemble implies the whole, and awareness of the whole. And to that we add the awareness of self in the awareness of the whole. And the triple loop learning adds that very dimension to holistic analysis, let's say. It adds the personal, the reflective, to the sense of the whole or the field. So it's a term then that created, I think it was the Harvard Business School or the MIT Business School, but it captures that idea of the inner dimension, which in most training programs was not there. So the triple loop learning is reflecting not just on what's out there, but who you are being while you are doing. And yeah, so that's the triple loop learning.
Tom.
Yeah, I like to. This has been profound for me, Patricia, and I don't actually want to talk about the patterns. I want to. There's a way in which the things that have been braided into my work, the different experiences and ideas, your ensemble awareness and your experience of the interior connection between individual, group, the different dimensions of whole, being woven together, different dimensions of wholeness and what the whole is, that there's your use of the word ensemble, I understand so much better now. And it's like, wow, is that word missing from my work or not? And I'm being put into a very thoughtful place. I want to share a couple of pieces from my story that I can touch base with to do the work to grow more into what you've made central here. I remember when I first learned circle process from this indigenous guy on the Great Peace March, and the idea that circle came from sitting around a campfire. and there was a fire in the middle, and that there was a speaking from the heart, and you are speaking from the place that is central in you and in the group. The fire represents the group consciousness, the group awareness, the collective, and the awareness that there is a kinship between the center of you and the center of the group, a place of resonance. It's not really an overlap, it's something more central. I created a word intercentricity, and it has a feeling of that. And to learn how, when the talking stick reaches you, to center into that place, which is not just your center, but is your center and the group center. And that's the ensemble thing that I'm hearing from you. I never had a word for it, never thought about it particularly. I think of it as an add-on to talk to people who are doing processes, not just we're taking turns. There's something else going on here in circle process. And now it has become in this conversation more central in my thinking and sensing. So I'm greatly appreciative of that. Do you know Rachel Bagby? Okay, Rachel Bagby is a Black woman who is a singer, and she has she was part of NCDD, and she has a word vibrolingual. And she will, in the middle of conversations, break into chants, songs, humming, whatever. And I met her at Fetzer Institute during Y2K. We were sitting in a circle talking about the intersection of spirituality and Y2K. And she was sitting next to me in a circle of 3 dozen people. And I did my saying, this gorgeous stone they had as a talking stick, all sorts of buried, fossils and stuff in it. And I pass it to the woman next to me, and she sits there holding the stone. And then she starts humming. She's going back and forth and humming. And then she starts singing without words. And she puts her hands out in front of her like this. And everybody in the group starts following her, and she's going all over with her voice, and the group is going all over with her voice. And then at one point she goes, and everybody quiets down. And she passes the stone to the next person. I'm going, who the fuck is sitting next to me? Who is this person? And I got to know her really well in the months, and to a certain extent years. I haven't been in touch much lately, but there was something about her consciousness and the way she was in the world, which was radically different from mine. And when you told the story of the guy singing in the church, I went, that's Rachel. I'm going to tell her about this, write to her and tell her about this thing. And the other thing that came up for me, which is not so much an experience, it's the Wilber's quadrants, his integral quadrants, internal, external, and I go, it is such a powerful, useful tool, but it's presented wrong. It's presented as quadrants. And that doesn't, it's useful because it's linear like that. It's like cutting up vegetables. I just had my breakfast, cut up vegetables, cut them one way, cut them the other, cut them the way, you got a bunch of chunks, it's really useful. But it misses some really important point. And there's some other way to present the integration of internal, external, individual, collective, which is closer to the essence of what you're talking about, the ensemble. What is the ensemble version of presentation for Wilber's quadrants that would make them so much real at a deeper level? I don't know, that's just an inquiry that came to me, but there's something fundamental which is at the core of the spiritual inspiration of co-intelligence, the wise democracy. And I've tried to express it in all sorts of different ways, but I haven't hit it. And I'm smelling it, tasting it, resonating with it in this conversation. I'm profoundly grateful for your pointing that out. And what I do with it, I don't know, but I'm just finishing my first book on co-intelligence. I'm going, shit, I don't have that don't have that sufficiently represented at all. So I have been deeply inspired. My mind is just dancing around in the space of all the ideas I've been working with, going, where can I bring this insight so that it is adequately shared with other people, and to test the edges and limitations of that insight, given the things I was always trying to have what happened to people in the space of conversation be of service to a larger wisdom that was engaging with the realities we're facing. And there's a way in which what you're saying both challenges and serves that. And I don't know how to resolve the disturbance that is raised by that, but I'm really interested in that question. So thank you. And I don't have I think there's a couple of patterns that sort of half-assedly touch on this, but it deserves such a more powerful thing. I did a whole analysis of patterns that would fit what I understood from your work, but I didn't get the essences of it as I have from your stories and your being and your presence. I thank your not you, but your presence. Thank your presence for its teaching power in this moment for me. Thank you. That's all.
Well, Tom, we were part of a mutual journey during very formative years, and I thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. The Tao of Democracy came out in 2003, so it's like, okay, it was part of the weaving. You're talking about the different forces that were emerging during the late 90s and early 2000s, and it's like, yes, okay, we're definitely part of that trip. Rose's hand has gone back up.
Yeah, I think we can kind of start to transition into more of a conversational and question stage. So over to you, Rosa.
Yeah. So I want to start with just pointing out that it's a parallel that I was hearing between, excuse me, your story, Patricia, and Tom's story is that I think that for both of you, it sounds like a kind of a initial grounding in social activism shifted into more of a grounding in process. Yeah. And I think that's really significant and worth pointing out, because there's something about also I feel a similar process for me. I was raised by very progressive parents and was very influenced by Paulo Freire's work, which I actually see as a bridge between those two worlds. And I think the reason I'm wanting to point to it is because there's something about how our caring about the whole can start out as a caring about those who are most oppressed by current systems of oppression, very understandably so, the earth, people who are impoverished, et cetera, et cetera. And then at some point, this realization that the way to change things most effectively isn't necessarily by this adversarial approach, but by a process where everyone can be heard, and a certain kind of relationship can be created, and etc. I'm just kind of thinking out loud as I say this, but there's so, and I'm just curious about that larger transition. I still feel very connected with activism. And so for me, it has to do with really looking at the relationship between, or right now, one of the ways it's taking shape is looking at the relationship between nonviolence and deliberative democracy, right? Because it's interesting to see how some people really kind of, I think as humans, we do this, right? Kind of glom on to, oh, deliberative mini publics are the thing that's going to change the world. And if we, replace elections with sortition, then that's like the thing that's going to save us. And the thing is, I don't think it's really any one thing that is going to save us. And I personally feel and see that there is still a lot of need for organizing for nonviolent civil disobedience, etc. And there's this, like, I'm feeling right now as I'm listening to both of you, kind of a desire for making that transition more explicit, calling more attention to it, etc. Because I think it's one that is something that many of us have experienced and that many more of us need to experience or to make more conscious or like that. So that's one thing. And then the other is just, I wish I remembered.
I'm sorry,
What?
Rose, I just didn't hear, and making what more explicit?
Making more explicit this kind of natural progression between wanting to be an activist to wanting to really be concerned about the process, right? It feels really significant to me to make that process, that transition more explicit in the larger whole. And just the second, and this one will be much briefer, but the person in Art of Hosting, it feels something or other that this quote is often attributed to, this thing about the inner condition of the intervener being a really key part of the intervention, right? Because so then that's the link between the focus on process and the focus on personal growth and development, etc. And I just want to say about that you had said something very early on about paradigms, Patricia, and how being in Texas, pointing to different paradigms was a way that you could communicate. And that's just really feeling very resonant for me, because I feel like as a bridge builder, like there's this need to create these bridges between kind of the scientific rationalist paradigm in which this inner condition of the intervener doesn't even show up, right? And the worldview, I guess you would call it a quantum one, which is where I see so many facilitators really living and breathing and working in and thinking and like that. And I don't want to be dissing the positivist paradigm. Whenever we get on a plane, we want to make sure that the mechanics have done their work quite well. And Andy helped me out here. There was a term in that wonderful course that we're taking about new ways of knowing, that term about it's not
propositional. Was that it?
The what?
You were talking about propositional knowing?
Well, but it was a term, it wasn't exactly the tyranny of propositional knowledge, but something like that, like the dominating, the hegemonizing. It wasn't that wonderful person whose work I didn't know until recently, John Bavecki. He has this term for how the propositional form of knowledge tends to colonize or dominate, right? So, but we're not wanting to obliterate it. We're not wanting to do away with it, but we're just really wanting to expand. So there's in philosophy, there's this term epistemic injustice, which I'm real fond of these days, but just kind of this thing of creating an environment where different forms of knowledge can be appreciated and coexist. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, if I could comment on that, the coexistence of different ways of knowing is part of where we want to go, and the recognition of the value of different ways of knowing. And so moving it from a either or kind of a proposition to a both and recognizing the legitimacy and contributions of each is what we want, especially in this divided country that we have right now. We are well situated to make that effort to understand other and to create spaces where our so-called other can be heard and hear their other. So yeah, I think there's a lot that we're being called to do right now.
Thank you, Patricia. Charlie, I see you have your hand raised. Would you?
Yeah, wow, thank you, Patricia. I'm just kind of soaking it up. And I do have a number of questions, but to try to bundle like some initial inquiry. One actually that I just kind of squeezed in, which is like that initial leap in maybe a faith or something. You were sort of like terrified, and then you kind of went into it, and then like unfolded. So I just like that is a kind of maybe a preface of some kind into. It was also said at the beginning that you're sort of into patterns and you make them or gather them and so on. So I'm curious about your pattern work. And then the thing that really riveted me was this image of the group as a living organism. And so with that, what are the patterns sort of in and around and coming out of that, but also that like that shift, it sounded like a leap of some kind. So those are my questions. Thank you.
Yeah. Pattern language. And that is out there. There is pattern language to describe the different patterns. What we're being asked to do, I believe, is to be able to recognize and weave together, or listen together to learn from the different pattern languages, so that we can see the pattern from these different perspectives, and a more a holistic view. I think that's I don't know if that was kind of what you were driving at, was what to do with the different patterns.
Well, I mean, again, that image of the living organism, the group as a living organism, and sort of anything in and around that is just so sort of vivid.
Yes.
And there's like, it's so rich with patterns, I guess. That's, I don't know, but yeah.
Right, that's great to see it as a living organism with multiple patterns taking place simultaneously. Beautiful. Mm-hmm.
And the living organism is embedded in the larger scene. So sensing into the field is not just sensing into the living organism, regardless of whether the living organism is a individual entity or a collective entity, and it's never one or the other. It's always both. But the field concept of the field helps you to extend beyond what you see as an entity into a bigger space that has more phenomenon influences happening in it, and to sense into that as a more holistic kind of quality. Anyway, appreciating this wildly. John.
Oh, go for it.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, sorry. Am I next or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm not going to write while I talk, but some of what I am going to say, I already wrote somewhere. One was just on that last one, for me, Tom, at least, like that larger, the sense of a larger whole that is beyond any of the given entities within, is for me another, like that is also a living organism. Like for me, it continues outward. And it resonates very much for me with how I came to understand the word group. Tom and I met 3 times 1 year in the 90s, at different events. And the third time was when the Center for Group Learning, which I had just gotten involved with, needed a button maker for an event, and somebody knew Tom and invited him, but he stuck, at least as much as I did in the group, which was led by people in organization development and transformation, but came to include some oddballs like us, who came from more the activist world. So group, when I realized the depth that, how that their understanding of group was like what we are talking about, that is what grabbed me, and kept me so engaged in that group for years. And I linked somewhere above to my understanding when we say process, and I love that you are using that word, Patricia. I have a friend, Brandon Williams Craig, who coined the term process arts, to refer to that, or process artist. There's a more common use of that term that is, really arts focused. One of my favorite quotes from him is, "Peace is conflict done well." And I tried to bring, I tried to help NCDD start a wiki, that I hoped would become a thriving community, which did not, but it was seeded with a whole bunch of practices, that are out there in this realm. Anyway, my understanding of process is that every process, whether they say it explicitly or not, includes the practices, a theory, a spirit, and the actual people, engaged in this process, and networks, communities, whatever it is, the actual people doing actual things, among whom, of course, the spirit will vary, but there is often, some kind of central sense of spirit. And then another thing I just wanted to throw in is that I wrote above is in the way I understand these things, each of which I've spent a lot of time digging into, is nonviolence, anarchy, consensus, and democracy. For me, all of those are really just branches off of one root. And yeah, I've never really dug deeply into that, specific commonality, those 4 things. But if I had multiple lifetimes, that would be a book I would have written already. So I'm just blathering words here to like what bounces such a deep sense of resonance. I really appreciate it.
So would you be willing to say again those different levels that you were talking about? I'm trying to take notes.
The nonviolence.
No. That
To
you
me,
wrote earlier.
Yeah. To me, every process that I encounter, whether they explicitly talk about these things or not, for me to understand it, I want to reflect on, understand what the practices are, what they do, why, not why, but what they do, so the step by step, both what they say their practice is and what their actual practice is, but it's all practice. A theory that explains, it comes partly out of their values, but it's also thinking, their understanding, really, that leads them to those practices. And actually the stated theory may not line up with you can learn a lot from that, but practice, theory, some kind of spirit. So a good example in my mind is neurolinguistic programming, where you can find people teaching it in very manipulative ways. And you can find people teaching in ways that are very, grounded in connection and so on. And I assume it's because in the early days of it, there kind of wasn't enough attention to spirit and it sort of went in all these directions. I don't know. Whereas nonviolent communication, one of my favorite stories about Marshall Rosenberg is when he found out somebody was teaching nonviolent communication to kind of show you how to manipulate people, he got in touch with that guy and he was like, oh, I just want you to know, if you keep doing this, I'm going to come and find you and kill you. This is Marshall's sense of humor, right? But it showed how seriously he took it. And it was the kind of thing he would do to try and make sure that the spirit in which it was being practiced in the world was as close as possible to what he intended. And then the fourth thing is the people, who the communities, the networks, whatever form it takes, that the people who are engaged in a process, like who those actual people are and what they are, actually doing, that drifts into the practice part. But yeah, that's the 4 bits. And I linked up above I was on an entire call with a group of, I don't know, sort of tech adjacent, but caring about the world kind of people about 10 years ago, where I got to talk about that at length and people, got to ask questions. And there's both a link to the full recording of the hour and like a 10 or 15, minute summary from Jerry Mikulski, who led those calls.
Thank you, Slow.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything you'd like to comment on that, Patricia? Which Slow shared?
And no, that was fascinating.
Maybe then I'll build on what Slow said, because it brings to mind, for me, a kind of dilemma I have in my own sort of practice of facilitation, and particularly in the UK, I'm involved with facilitating citizens' assemblies. And often I feel that the atmosphere, I don't know, the spirit is infused with a much more sort of linear, not so, non-emergent, like the facilitation style of the other of the group that often that I'm involved in is much less of this sort of slowed down feeling into the group, feeling into the ensemble awareness. It's not a cultural thing within the organizations that I work with, and as a result, I find it very hard to bring those practices, which I have some awareness of myself, into those spaces. And yeah, I just wondered if you have any sort of reflections on that. Is bringing this kind of awareness and practice, does it require a sort of a field of practitioners to bring that into a space? What are the sort of contextual elements that are needed for this?
Well, I'd be pleased to comment on that. I was, I do get disappointed with public participation activities, because when they're organized by the local government, let's say, they're perceived as a chance for your side to get the floor, And yes, you have to listen to the other side. But I see very little use of dialogic methods still today in public participation processes. There are some amazing examples of deep public participation processes, but by and large, the culture of public participation process has not lived up to what we know is possible. And that's very frustrating and demoralizing. And the funny thing is, I could recognize it in myself not too long ago, where the city of Austin came up with a proposal to cut out public participation in planning and long processes and all that stuff, and just make the decisions. And of course, the decisions were pretty progressive decisions, but it was not done in a participatory way. And I found myself getting just really, really frustrated with that. And so, you know, much of the public is disaffected and blah, blah, blah. So even though we know better, local government in particular is not living up to what's possible. And it's, I felt myself falling into one camp versus another camp on this controversial issue, and lamented the fact that council didn't offer a participatory approach to it. And the other thing is that even when you have your so many seconds at the mic, that is not what we consider to be a creative participatory process. So I found myself digging in my heels into one side on this issue. And I thought, wait a minute, I thought I was in favor of participatory approaches, and I'm not being heard. So it's an uphill battle still. And often when we do have a very creative process, who participates? You know, it's not a cross section. It's the voices and faces you probably have heard before, who have the time and will to engage in a long participatory process. So it's disappointing to me what we have not been able to do with public participation, except for some unfortunately isolated examples.
Thanks, Patricia. That's really helpful. I'm going to go even further and say that actually, you know, some of the work I do does actually manage to bring a cross section. We use like sortition, and people are given money, they're randomly selected to come and take part. So it's not just always the usual voices, but even still, some of this sort of deeper awareness-based practice, I think is quite hard and a little bit countercultural still, and not easy to, from my perspective. I think it requires courage, and I think maybe that's the missing element for me. But yeah, yeah, it's not easy to bring that in. Thank you. So yeah, there's Michael, who's been waiting for a while to share.
And Rosa's joined.
Yeah, and Rosa I see as well, yeah.
I was going to say one thing, and I'm kind of feeling what is the most useful contribution to this conversation. So I was feeling a frustration that has simply just arisen right now. As long practitioners, we've seen different forms of greenwashing, democracy washing, you know, all kinds of ways in which like authority becomes more sophisticated, but authority continues to do what authority does. And so there's this, you know, are we are we simply, which loop of the triple loop are we really educating? And so I was listening, for example, Patricia, for how did USAID change as a result of this project? Or did they just develop a more clever tool, hire somebody that spoke the language of public participation, and see if they can get those revolutionaries down in El Salvador to behave differently? You know, so were you an activator of change, or were you just a more clever ruse for somebody else who was further back pulling strings? And I think we are all in these games of like, you know, how do we try and contribute, knowing fully well that we're dealing with people with different agendas and who are playing their own games of chess in which we're trying to unfold forward. That was the place that I was kind of like, just keep your mouth shut. Don't go there. Don't say this, because we're all trying here and we don't need to be throwing darts at each other. But after this last exchange, I thought I would share a story. I'm an accidental academic, and that I shared a series in the Obama administration. I shared a series of case studies in an article about how public participation had enabled problem solving that had not been possible previously. And that got me an invitation to teach at a local university. And even though I didn't go the usual route, I've very much always been a kind of practitioner, academic, rather than someone who had the theory of change. But a story that I found useful to tell those who are the power and are like, no, I just need you to get it done, is a story, an article about the nuclear plant on the Savannah River in South Carolina, where there was a fight going on between the federal and local government over how to monitor. Well, there was a fight and nobody knew what the fight was about. And there was a lot of skepticism about whether or not this was a major crisis or something else. And it turned out that after much public participation, and the local community knew that there was a tradition of don't say the truth. This is, you know, of the DOD culture of just keep your mouth shut, and just, so they didn't trust anything that was coming from the other side. Through a process of public participation, they came to see that what the fight was about was the federal people saying you need to measure 100 feet from where the water is coming out of the plant, and the state guy was saying 50 feet. And it was a kind of who is smarter about the measurement thing. And as it became clear that, okay, they're really not that far apart, and the community then started believing that the thing could be resolved. And it took time, but what happened about 2 years later was there was a different kind of political fight. And it was the community that then went to Washington and stood up in favor of the nuclear regulatory commission, saying, we believe what they're saying, we believe what they're doing, and please continue to fund what is happening here, rather than have some political. So it gave legitimacy that otherwise you couldn't buy. You can't budget legitimacy. You can't hire it. You can't contract it, right? And it enabled, but it was an investment that only arrived over time. And so these kind of, how do we help these people who think they're, oh no, I'm the master magician, I've got the funding, and I'm going to direct this, to build these superpowers that otherwise are not available to them. And yes, there's something about, I love, by the way, I started with a dinging. I love that you started with the transformational journey, the hearting, because I too, like you, believe that is the pathway to the not transcendent, but the trans-ending, you know, the breaking open of whatever it was that we believed previously into a new way of being. But it's always messy, and that's why I loved what Andy had to say about courage, because, you know, somehow or another there's going to be awkward, messy, you know, and can we help carry that? So I know I talked a lot now. I tried to listen. Listen. And thank you for trying to advance this conversation in the world. It's a hard thing we're doing here.
Well, I'd like to thank you for recognizing that it is. And for all of us involved in community engagement of some sort, I just want to say that sometimes we can't measure the impact, but it's there. And I'll give you one example. So when I was just learning to do this facilitation and created a huge event that brought together the FMLN on one side and the right wing on the other side and some other groups all together in El Salvador for and groups from the rural areas and the urban areas all together in an event in the capital city. I was a brand new and scared facilitator. And I wanted to be sure that everybody, all the breakout groups were on time, So I would walk around and they each had their own room. So I would go from room to room to look at my watch and see where they were. And one of them finally said to me, Patricia, leave us alone. We are doing great. And so, we don't get we're not part of the feedback loop sometimes. And that taught me to trust that, you bring people together who don't normally talk together in a place where they have a chance to speak and listen. Magic is going to happen. Breakthroughs are going to be made. And let us just trust that. So I've carried that one with me ever since that day. Leave us alone.
Michael, I wanted to understand a little bit more about your story. Let me just reflect back the part I did understand. There was something about people organizing against a nuclear power plant and then through some kind of public engagement process, developing trust. And then this trust ended up being useful later on in terms of in a good way, I guess I was concerned because you'd started out your whole story with concerns about greenwashing and whatever. So I was just wanted to make sure you weren't saying that the trust that was built up between the activist and the regulatory commission was then used against the activist later on, okay. Yeah. No, I just get really concerned and careful when it comes to nuclear stuff because I think it, it's a real big concern. But along these lines, and what you had talked about greenwashing and all, there's a wonderful article I just came across that was created by the Harvard Negotiation and Mediation Clinical Program by some students there who are activists, and it's on power, protest, and political change. I'm going to put this link in the chat, but the first chapter is all about it's called The Big Trap, and it's about when social movements should not negotiate, because negotiation, unfortunately, can be used as a way of disempowering a movement, right? People will say, oh, let's come to the table and find some kind of mutually agreeable thing, and then use that as a delaying tactic. And so this is a really very easy to read and yet very in-depth look at how do we balance these two things of activism and negotiation, engagement, consensus building, etc. Right? And because it is tricky and things can be misused and manipulated, etc. So I wanted to share that. And then there's another report. They have a wonderful resources section, and one of the things that I found there that was most interesting to me is this report on how activists can maintain nonviolent discipline in movements, because as we know, that's one of the ways that the government can infiltrate promoting violence to then legitimate coming in and arresting people, etc. So just a ton of resources. I was very surprised to find here, I guess, kind of smashing a few of my assumptions about what Harvard is all about. Harvard is about lots of different things, but amongst them, there's some very interesting programs around activism. So I wanted to share both of those links there. And there was something else that I had wanted to say before, but I can't even remember it. And Charles has his hand up, so I'm going to pause for now and hopefully have a chance to say something later.
Thanks. Yeah, just to tag on there, Rosa, actually, I didn't, I had written this as my second question earlier, just something around the, Patricia, you mentioned about being in Latin America and being, you know, involved in left.
It's been a minute. You could be around a little while.
No, thanks. Anyway, yeah, leftist politics, Latin America, 70s, 80s. So there was something there about the violence piece. I mean, there's so much, I don't know, we can come back to that. But that, actually, my hand went up just to go back to that story about the children's park and the transformation of the dump site. And I guess it was really a curiosity about the energetic transformation or the cleansing aspect, and what came from the children in that. Actually, is my question. Thanks.
Well, what the children were able to leverage was adult involvement and a sense of being able to make a difference. Because when it came down to after the children made their presentation to the adults, you know, we asked the question, so what do you all say? And they had to decide whether to support what the children said. Well, they had done such a beautiful job of presenting their ideas for the park and choosing a name for the park. The adults said yes. And so the benefit there was having adults who not all, you know, and only a small part of whom had already worked together. So they were bringing in new parents, new adults from the community to go to work together on what is a very simple project, but very meaningful because it was mobilizing a larger portion of the adults in the community to do something that would have tangible and quick but ongoing results that could be seen. And there was a lot of complexity in the neighborhood in terms of different subgroups, and here they were working together. So the overall impact was a sense of collective agency and communication. So I think that addresses what you were asking. Go ahead and clarify if you want.
Well, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, just like the not quite emotion, but just the energetic sense that I was having was about the literally transformation from a dump site to a children's park, a place to play, and that it's presumably clean in all kinds of ways. But you know, maybe there were toxins. I don't know. But yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Slow, and then Ying.
Thank you. I scheduled just till 10:30, so I'll be stepping away, but I'll come back and listen later. My question or questions, Patricia, and this just comes from a deep respect, of everything you're doing. I'd really love to hear where your leading edge is now with all this. What is the questions that you're with now about how to take us, or take your work, from where things are now to the next step, the next level, from where it is, and if you like, also to reflect on that for the field. But I'd love to hear first, in your own work. And I'm going to step away, but thank you so much. I really appreciate this.
Well, this is a delicate and meaningful question for me, as I just retired a year ago from the university. And I am discovering that life has so many more things to offer, including twice a week pickleball, which I have to leave for very soon.
Yeah.
And I've been enjoying art and dance and culture and entertaining and social life and swimming and jogging and and so I don't know how long this phase will last. And I do have a sense that so much is continuing that is exciting and positive, and I'm happy to play a role. And indeed, I've given a few talks and Zoom chats, here and there internationally during this year. But I'm not planning a major new initiative along the lines that I've been working on, but I want to support efforts along those lines. And in so doing, I may be motivated to write about them or to support them in certain ways. So I'm open for ideas for this next phase of my life. And yeah, so I do need to leave pickleball.
Oh, you have to go now.
Yeah. I just want to say, Patricia, that I would love very much the opportunity to follow up with you and explore one-on-one what might interest you, and just get your feedback on some projects I'm working on.
Great,
if you
great,
might be
Rosa, I'd
available
love
for
to do
that.
that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. If you have to go, thank you so much, Patricia.
Yeah.
Really appreciate the time you spent with us, and really for your presence. I think you help create a field of beautiful conversations. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Andy. And I really admire what you all are doing through the Co-Intelligence Institute. So carry on. Bye.
Blessings on the journey.